Welcome to the Bizcomps Database Demonstration. My name is Kent Lance Schmidt, and I'm the President of National Business Appraisers, Inc. I'm a Certified Valuation Analyst, or CVA, with NACVA, the National Association of Certified Valuators and Analysts. I'm a CBI, or Certified Business Intermediary, with the International Business Brokers Association, and I'm a former CPA, as well as a member of CAB, the California Association of Business Brokers, and I was on their board and their treasurer for 2015 to 2016. I also teach the Advanced Valuation course for 201 with other members of the committee. That advanced course 201, Recasting and Valuation, was recently revised by the Education Board, of which I'm a member. So let's begin. The Bizcomps database is actually the second database that was developed. It was developed by Jack Sanders for small businesses, Main Street businesses, and was the second database, as IBA database was actually the first. Jack started this database in 1990. The Bizcomps database was developed primarily to address weaknesses of the IBA database, now known as Value Source Market Comps database. The Bizcomps database contains 21 fields of information, and it's based on the criteria that business brokers felt were most important. Most of the information is contributed by business brokers with the certification, and today the database contains over 25,000 transactions. As I mentioned, the database has over 25,000 transactions. It contains 21 data fields by which you can compare transaction to transaction. The median revenue is $167,000, and the average selling price of the database is $345,000, and it's available online both for single searches as well as to purchase the entire database. So what is actually sold or reported sold in a Bizcomps transaction? Well, first it should be known that the data only contains asset sales, so there are no stock sale data that are contributed to Bizcomps. They're only asset sales. So you won't find stock sale data in that database. Each database or each piece of data or comparable contains furniture, fixtures, and equipment values, as well as goodwill or intangible assets. Those are included in each transaction, as well as any value for licenses if that's applicable. However, inventory is always indicated separately, and that's important. While the database does show the amount of inventory, it excludes it from both the asking price and the sale price, so that the value derived is a pure value for each comp. Therefore, when you get a sample, that sample will have a pure value excluding inventory. The reason for this is that the inclusion of inventory in smaller businesses would distort the sale price and lead to erratic ratios. You can have higher or lower inventory levels in any given company than usual, and that can distort the value. This is one of the primary reasons that Jack developed this database, is to exclude inventory from the actual transaction so that they could be then added later. You should always add inventory of your subject company to your multiple once you've extrapolated the value by applying it to either SDE or revenue. It's important that you add inventory or your value will be off. There's an excellent example of this in the user's guide. The analyst can customize their client's value by including the actual inventory rather than having a value that has inventory already included in it and you don't know what that is. Again, that's one of the salient features of Bizcomps and why it's important that it's segregated and inventory has been separated from the data. In the sale of businesses, there's two types of potential sales. There's an asset sale or a stock sale. All the transactions reported in the Bizcomps database are asset sales, as we mentioned earlier. What does that include? Well, that includes the value or what is sold for the furniture, fixtures, equipment, goodwill, and possibly licenses and contracts. However, the value derived by Bizcomps transactions can be converted to a stock sale or equity value. That conversion can be done with the software itself using two specific tabs. At the lower, as you get into our presentation, you'll see there are a couple of different tabs that you can use to make that comparison. Those tabs are the subject company tab and or the equity tabs that are next to each other at the bottom of the software, as you'll see in our presentation. There are two multiples that can be derived using the Bizcomps database. Those multiples are the sales price to revenues and the sale price to discretionary earnings. So those two values are what we will use to apply to the data of the subject company. Revenues is self-explanatory, but as for discretionary earnings, we note that Bizcomps uses sellers' discretionary earnings, known as SDE, as a profit level. That's the profit level that the database uses. So SDE is basically EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, plus the salary of one owner and their perks. Appraisals will generally add a normalized owner's salary or compensation to arrive at true enterprise value as well. With the Bizcomps database, you have the ability to compare transactions. You can compare transaction to transaction within the database, or you can compare any transaction within the database to that of your subject company. And that's important to see how close of a fit each of those individual sold comparable companies are to your subject company, or how the overall sample that you select is comparable to your company. Because if it's not comparable, then it simply isn't relevant, and you can't use it to value your company. There are 5 primary and 5 secondary areas of comparison. The 5 primary areas of comparison are a comparison by SIC or NAICS code, description of the business, amount of revenue, profitability, or percent of rent paid. SIC stands for Standard Industrial Code and is the oldest classification system among businesses and was developed by the United States. The North American, or NAICS code, North American Industry Classification System, was developed secondarily and is probably the more accurate. It's more specific and it breaks down the codes better, has more codes in it. That's one I typically use, but both codes are acceptable and are different areas of way you can compare companies and transactions. The 5 secondary areas of comparison are by down payment in terms, size of its inventory, the days on market, number of employees, and by location. Finally, there are 2 other areas of comparison by the estimate of the fixture and equipment value, as well as by franchise information if that's applicable. Now we'll proceed with our actual demonstration. For this demonstration, we're going to use sample business criteria. The criteria is such as the description of the business will be considered a sign manufacturer. Amount of revenue of the business is $500,000. Its level of profitability, or SDE, is $90,000, and it's classified by an SIC code of 3993 or an NAICS code of 339950, and it's not a franchise. The next thing you'll see is the Bizcomps database interface. So if you have any more questions after the database and after you've seen its demonstration, feel free to go to bizcomps.com or to email me, Lance, at nationalbusinessappraisers.com, or call me. My phone number, I'll give you my cell number. It's 949-533-6965. I love helping people with this database, so feel free to contact me for that help. Next thing you'll see will be the Bizcomps database interface. So once you go to BV Data World and you log on and sign in with your password and your ID, you will see this interface. If you look here, you will notice the total number of transactions in the database is 15,458 at this point. You'll see that there's 2 different types of searches. There's a standard search or a detailed search. And we're not going to get into the detailed search. Obviously, it's more detailed, but there's a better way, in my opinion, of doing it anyway, using this analysis tab that we'll get to down to later. So if you look here, in addition to that, these 3 areas of comparison here or sorting, you can also sort by SIC code or from low to high within the database. But in my opinion, it's more efficient using this analysis tab, or using the analysis that you can click on this tab and it'll pull up a linked spreadsheet in Excel format. And it's much easier to sort in that form as far as I'm concerned. So that's the only way, the demonstration I'm going to show you today. I believe it's the best. So we'll get started. One more thing before I enter the data is just to show you the layout of this interface. You can see there you have the SIC and NAICS codes here, the description of the subject company, its revenue size, its seller's discretionary earnings size, the asking price, sale price, and the multiples, the price to revenue and price to SDE, as well as its location. And there are more fields off to the right here, but it's not shown on this demonstration. You'll see it later on. So that's why it's important to look at these different areas here in each transaction so you compare them. This is part of what we were talking about previously. All right, now for our demonstration. Okay, as I mentioned, there are three areas of searching, three primary fields you can use to search. I like to start with the description field, so I can put in something about the company. That way it'll pull up some of the companies and I can find the NICS and SIC code to then input to this other search, and you'll see what I'm seeing in a second here. So we'll start with the word sign. I'm only going to put in sign, not sign manufacturer, because that'll give us the broadest search criteria in our search. So let's do that. And here we see a bunch of different sign manufacturers, as well as other sign companies that have different SIC and NACS codes. But we want sign manufacturers associated with a SIC code of 3993 and an NAICS code of 339950, as we mentioned when we started. So I like the more narrow NAICS code search. So I'm going to enter 339950 up here, 339950, and I'm going to remove this because there may, that search word, there may be some sign manufacturers that don't have the word sign in it. So it could narrow the search arbitrarily. So you always want to eliminate your descriptive word and just lead with simply either your NAICS code or SIC code. Again, NAICS is more narrow. It should give a better, cleaner sample, hopefully. And if the sample's too small, you can always double back and use SIC code. So now we'll look at our search. Now we saw the records decreased from 15,000 to 167. Let's see what happens when we search by NICS code. All right, there we go. 105 transactions. It got rid of anything that wasn't sign manufacturer or with these codes. So now we have a more clear and complete sample to search from and to revise. We want to continue to work on that sample to make sure that we get the right criteria and that we get a very clean sample that is statistically relevant. So although you could search by SIC code here or low to high, there's a way that I believe is preferable to do that, and that is to go to the analysis tab here, or excuse me, the analysis button, and it will bring up, as you can see here, Bizcomps in an Excel spreadsheet format, and that's what we're going to use. So once you enable the spreadsheet and open it up, this is what you'll see. And you'll see that you have to do two things. Number one, you'll see that it's in a protected view here. So we have to enable the spreadsheet in order to manipulate it. Okay? Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to enable the content. Again, for security reasons, this will allow macros to work. So they've been disabled unless you enable this content. There we go. Now we've enabled the content and the spreadsheets, and we see there are numerous tabs down the bottom: about, data, select transactions, transactions selected, etc. We'll get into these tabs as we move along. But in this tab, the about tab that it opens up in, note that it'll explain what there is in each of these different transaction or tabs below. It talks about the extended data. It talks about the select transactions tab, the transaction selectors tab, the tools, statistics, etc. So if you wonder or can't remember what these tabs are, you can always come back to the About tab in order to learn more about those various tabs. So let's take a look at this Data tab for a minute down below here. This Data tab shows those different categories for which you can compare. You can see the comparison by SIC, NACE code, business description, revenues, SDE, inventory, etc. all the way across. These are the primary areas of comparison of the business, and then these are the other transactional items such as asking price, revenue to down payment, price to revenue, price to SDE, etc. And farther off to the left, or farther off to right, which you can't see, it has location and others that you can scroll over here to. So we're going to begin our search. You can investigate this later and look at it yourselves, but let's begin by selecting our transactions. So we go to the Selected Transactions tab, or Select Transactions tab next. There is a note that appears here. The way to eliminate that note is to click on the selected here, right arrow, go down and show delete or hide, and you can get rid of that note. All right, now we see the number of transactions we have here that we selected before, and we can now see further our reduction, or we can continue to pare down our search. As I mentioned, we have a company has revenues of $500,000 or 500,000. So when you do a search, you don't want to search just for 500,000. It's too narrow. You might get one company or might not get any. So what I do is I create a range. In this case, I'm going to use a range of 300,000 to 700,000 to capture companies within a couple hundred thousand in either direction of our subject company's revenues. So the way to do that is to come up here to the revenue column, click on it, right click, and it allows you to then sort, and I sort by ascending order. There we go. Now we see there's signed companies that have as little as $52,000 in revenue, 87,000, 100,000. So we want to get rid of all of these transactions up to the 300,000 level. Okay? The way to do that is to come over to the left here, click on this tab, True. You saw when I clicked it, it disappeared. But you can do more than one at a time. What you can do is you can hold down the Control button and arrow down to the other transactions in order to eliminate what you need or what you don't want. So we're going to start again here. I said Control. Actually, you hold down the Shift button. So you hold the Shift button down and arrow down, and it'll get rid of some of those transactions for us. So we click here, and we arrow down to the 300,000 level of revenue, which is right there. While we're still in this area here, we right click, and it gets rid of all of that data. All right, so now that we've got rid of data with companies that are below 300,000, we have to eliminate those companies that are above 700,000. So we scroll down here, and we see where the companies at 700,000 start, and here's companies above 700,000. You can see it goes actually up to $4 million in revenue, which is way above our company. But we're going to want to eliminate those from 715 down to the bottom here. So again, we go over here to the left, click on True, hold down the arrow key with the Shift, and go down to our last column here, or our last row, right click, and there we go. We've now eliminated all of the companies that are above 700,000 in revenue or below 300,000 in revenue. So the next thing I like to do after I've seen that is I like to check my statistics. So I'll go over here to the statistics and see what we've got. As I click on this tab, you can see a couple things. First, you can see one of the columns is truncated. So I'll go over here and click on this, hit Format, Basic Excel function here. And I also don't like the way the revenue points here, so I'm going to format that and get it so that we can see it all in one. There we go. Now we have our data. So some things to note here. You saw we started with 105 transactions. By narrowing the range, just by narrowing the range from 300,000 to 700,000, we're now down to 48 transactions. This is good. That's a real good sample size. As long as you've got more than 6 items in your database, you're okay, or excuse me, your sample, then your sample has a chance of being relevant. You want to have, the more you can have, the better, but 48 is plenty. So you always want to have at least 6 if you can. The other things you want to initially check is to see how statistically relevant it is. What you look for is this coefficient of variation. That's a measure of statistical accuracy. It tells you how close the grouping of the data are to each other. Later on, I'll show you a regression line so that you can see how close they are in a scattergram. But 0.79 is the coefficient of variation for this sample based on where it is without trimming any farther. 0.79 is too high. To be statistically relevant, you want a coefficient variation of 0.30 or lower if possible. If it's slightly higher than that's okay, but your goal is 0.30 right here. All right, so let's go and let's trim this sample down some more, and let's eliminate a few more pieces of data and see if we can get the grouping of the data better. So the next thing is to go over to back to our data here. Excuse me, our select transactions, and let's trim this some more. The way I do that is I start to sort by, I will sort in ascending order by price to STE. And the reason is, if you look back at this data in our statistics, you can see that price to STE, even after our trim, it has one of the companies has a 13 multiple of seller's discretionary earnings, which we should know is just way too high for anything like that. Generally speaking, based on my experience, the range should be about 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 5, but anything below 1, as it shows here, or anything much above 5, we should probably eliminate. So that's why I'm going to do the sort by STE. So let's go back to our transactions. Let's go to price to STE, click on that, right click, hit ascending. And there we go. Now it's in ascending order of ratios of the price to STE, and we can see some of the outliers here. Outliers, I would consider those under 1. So here's our 1. This would be our cutoff mark here. So let's get rid of these individual companies here, and then let's check back and see what it does to our coefficient of variation and the other statistics. So right click there, right click there, right click there, right click there, one more time. Now let's go down here and let's go back to our statistics. Okay, went from 48 to 43 as far as our count is concerned, and the coefficient variation did come down from 79 to 0.79 to 0.73, but it's still too high, and it's probably at least this one item here, if not a couple others. So let's go back to our select transactions and let's eliminate this one data point as well as anything else that's much above 5. So we go back to selected transactions. Let's just scroll down and get to the bottom here. Okay, we can see here's our problem child right here, so let's get rid of it. Now, we could have a company that might have a 5 multiple, probably a little high. Usually I'd say the range is 1 to 4 for a sign manufacturer. But let's just take a look at the data and see what just eliminating that one high point does to our data here. So let's go back to statistics and look at this. We are now at a 0.31 coefficient of variation, very close to 0.30. We could use this data just like it is. And we have a median of 2.23, and our mean is 2.23 as well, and our harmonic mean is 2.04. So just for fun, we're going to go back and deselect that one other transaction that was a little higher and see what it does to the coefficient of variation and these other data. So you can see our harmonic mean is 2.04 and coefficient of variation is 0.31. So let's go back and let's eliminate that one item. All right, let's go back to our statistics. Well, there we go. Coefficient of variation is now below 0.30. It's at 0.27. And our harmonic mean dropped from 2.04 to 2.1. Now, as far as I'm concerned, using an STE multiple, this is where I would stop. We wouldn't have to go any further. We've got 41 data points. We've got a very good harmonic mean. Coefficient of variation is 0.27, and that means the data is relevantly close to each other. We could do this again for revenues, and we could further sort it, or you can save this as a spreadsheet, make a second one, and do two separate, go through this scenario twice, once for price to revenue, once for price to STE. But in this demonstration, it's sufficient to show just the price to STE and how we're using the database to get to a multiple that we feel is reasonable. Again, I use harmonic mean. A lot of people use median. Some use the mean. I feel you should use either the median or harmonic mean in terms of accuracy. I tend to like the harmonic mean because usually it's a little lower, a little more conservative. The next thing I want to show you is how you can turn an asset value into a stock sale value. Again, normally what we're going to use is we're going to use one of these metrics, either the harmonic mean 2.01 times the seller's discretionary earnings of our company, which would be 90. So basically 180 would be the value of the company, $180,000 plus inventory would be the value of the company, or 2.2 times the SDE of the company, or 2.17. So the next thing you do, once you have calculated your Main Street value, you can convert it to a stock sale in the event that you need to do that if your company happens to be larger. The way you do that is to go down to the Subject Company tab here and enter your data. Start with your revenue, net income, interest, income taxes, depreciation, amortization, non-cash expenses, etc., etc., and over here the owner's compensation less than working salary of a manager, and that will give you your SDE multiple, or your SDE value, the metric. Additionally, you can over here, you can add in the items that are going to transfer in this stock sale, if it's a stock sale, to get your equity value. Any cash, accounts receivable, inventory, etc. The FF&E, obviously, real estate. You can throw real estate in there if you're trying to create a stock value that has real estate in it. Any other assets that aren't noted, accounts payable, other payables, other liabilities that transfer, including long-term debt. When you do that, it'll create an equity value. The way it creates the equity value, as you look on this tab, is it chooses a multiple. It automatically selects the mean, but you can change this, and you could scroll down and make this the median or harmonic mean. Same with revenue or price to SDE. You can go down here and choose harmonic mean, and it'll choose 2.01 now. Then you can assign a weight. If, for me, I may not want to use the price to revenue ratio. So what you can do is go over here and make this value 0, and now you'll see that 100% of the weight of the value is based on price to SDE. However, if you want to go through this twice and use revenues, and you want to look at both the price to revenue and price to SDE, then you can use 50%, or you can change that percentage. You can make it 20 and 80, or 30 and 70, etc. So you choose that, and that will then determine your equity value that you can use for a stock sale. As I mentioned earlier, there are some other things and tools you can use down here. You can go over to the Price to SDE tab, and it will show you the price to SDE over SDE. It shows you a scattergram. Here's price to SDE. This is a regression line, and you can see how close the data is grouped. I quite often give this to a client too, but you can see some of the outliers here that are a little bit farther out. We could always eliminate those if we chose to. But our coefficient of variation is sufficient, so I won't do that. But these are nice additional tools that you can use in the database. Just to finish up, what I often do is I will highlight the metric I'm using so it's easy for people to find, and I will give this to my client. Also, if we go over to the tools, you can see a lot of other data that you can use if you want to manipulate the data, and I again would suggest you look through this. It can be very helpful for some of the other things that we have. The other thing I do is I provide my client with the selected transactions, and after eliminating the hide and hiding the note, I will give them this so they can actually look at the data. That concludes our demonstration for this purposes here. Feel free to contact me again. My cell number 949-533-0906. Excuse me, 949-533-6965. Or you can email me at lance@nationalbusinessappraisers.com. I hope this has been beneficial to you, and I wish you the best. Take care and have a good day.